The wagon lurched to a stop with a jarring crack that echoed across the empty plain. Emma Anders gripped the reins, silver hair caught in the wind, her husband's shovel still in hand. Their caravan of supplies, flour, blankets, tools, sat tilted as one spoke, snapped on the front wheel. Behind her, 12-year-old Magnolia staggered forward, clutching her little cloth satchel. No sooner had Emma cried out than the horizon darkened with figures on horseback. Dozens of warriors, faces painted red and ochre, their moccasins kicking up dust, circled the stranded family. Spears and tomahawks glinted in the midday sun. The men of the Anders party fumbled for rifles, but Emma held up a trembling hand. "They mean to take our food," she whispered to her husband, panic rising in her voice. Magnolia swallowed hard, recalling every cautionary tale she had ever heard about tribes taking settlers' supplies by force. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. There was only one loaf of bread left in their entire stock, and even that was half stale. But she watched those painted warriors as they rode nearer, curious eyes fixed on the broken wagon. Their leader, a tall man with a single eagle feather in his hair, raised an arm, and momentarily the war cry fell silent. Emma's husband, John, raised his rifle in warning. The clan chief looked past the gun barrel, his gaze drifting to the strap across Magnolia's shoulder. Within that small child's frame, he saw fear, yes, but also something else, a steady gaze that dared him to make the wrong move. Before Emma or John could react, little Magnolia stepped from behind her mother, every head turned toward her. The chief brought his horse to a halt. Magnolia's heart hammered, but she kept her voice clear. "Sir," she called, "you can have my bread." Her words rippled across the circle like ripples on a pond. A hush fell over the prairie. Magnolia unsnapped the satchel, produced the loaf wrapped in thin cloth, and extended it on trembling arms. The bread was nothing more than a few crumbs pressed into hardened dough, but in that moment it felt like everything she owned. The chief's eyes flickered, a moment of surprise, then something warmer. He dismounted silently, his horse's hooves stirring up dust. Seated before Magnolia, he reached out and took the cloth-wrapped loaf. Slowly, he unwrapped it, studying the tiny hand that offered the gift. Time seemed to pause. The wind stilled, the war party held their breath, and the Anders family watched as the chief broke off a piece of bread. He bit into it, closing his eyes as if tasting land itself. Then he handed the loaf back, gesture soft as a whisper. Magnolia caught the chief's eye and nodded, as if understanding passed between them in a single glance. The warriors lowered their weapons, curiosity melting into quiet reverence, and in that silence, a single act of kindness began to rewrite a century of fear. The chief folded the cloth over the remainder of the loaf and tucked it into his sash. Around him, his warriors exchanged hesitant glances, their war paint seeming to soften in the afternoon light. At last, the chief looked back at Magnolia and nodded once, a gesture both grave and gracious. "Your heart is brave, little one," he said, his voice low but carrying across the circle. He spoke in their language, then pointed to John's rifle and his own warriors' spears. With a single-hand sweep, he offered his oath. No harm would come to the Anders family or their wagons. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She approached the chief, voice trembling with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know how to repay such mercy." He met her gaze evenly. Then he turned to his men. speaking a few rapid words. A handful of riders peeled away, galloping off toward the distant hills. Magnus? Olia watched them vanish, clutching her satchel, her fear now mingled with wonder. "Come," the chief said, motioning toward the broken wheel. A young warrior knelt beside the wagon and set to work with a small tool kit. Heat-treated stone awl, wooden wedges, and a length of tanned hide for a makeshift bushing. Another brought water from the creek and poured it gently over the wheel's hub. The tribe's skill, honed by generations on horseback, turned what would have taken days into mere moments. While the wheel was repaired, the chief sat beside Magnolia on a sun-warmed rock. He pulled from under his robe a small carved token, a bear clutched in a child's arms, revealing a symbol of kinship in his tribe. He pressed it into Magnolia's hand and placed hers on his heart. In that silent exchange, Magnolia understood. She was made part of something far larger than her family's journey. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the wagon stood upright, wheels sturdy once more. The chief stood and raised his arm in farewell. His warriors echoed the gesture, offering quiet calls of thanks. Emma and John loaded their supplies, and before climbing back into the wagon, Emma handed the chief a tin of salted pork, a small token of the settler's gratitude. He accepted it with a solemn bow. As the Anders family rode away, Magnolia looked back to see the tribe melting like shadows into the twilight. Clutched in her small fist was the bear token, its smooth wood warm from the chief's hand. In her heart, she carried more than the chief's gift. She carried the knowledge that compassion, even from a child, can bridge worlds. News of Magnolia's gift and the tribe's mercy traveled faster than a prairie wildfire. By the time the Anders wagon crested the next rise, word had reached a cluster of homesteads and the small town of Red Rock Gulch. Settlers paused in their daily chores, plowing fields, mending roofs, to exchange hushed rumors. A settler child had tamed the heart of a fierce warrior nation with nothing but a piece of bread. At the saloon, rough-hewn cowhands tipped their hats more politely than usual. In the general store, a merchant paused over his ledger, considering whether an act so selfless might yet buy him safe passage through Indian country. Yet not everyone greeted the story with wonder. Fearful murmurs surfaced. Had the Anders family compromised their safety by treating savages as equals? May Anders brushed such worries aside and tucked Magnolia's bear token into her daughter's satchel before they continued westward. Meanwhile, the chief returned to his village with tales of the little settler girl's courage. Elders nodded gravely at the symbolic bond they now shared with Magnolia's people. They resolved to honor that bond if ever the settlers faced hardship. So, when a sudden spring flood swept through the canyon the very next week, stranding a family just upriver, the tribe rode out at dawn. Their swift horses and expert knowledge of hidden fords saved the stranded settlers, delivering them safely to high ground. When those grateful homesteaders reached Red Rock Gulch and told their story, how the Indians had pulled them from Rage's waters, prejudice faltered for many. They remembered the tale of Magnolia's bread and realized that compassion flows both ways across the frontier. And in every campfire glow, children sat wide-eyed as travelers repeated that day when a little girl's kindness reshaped the boundaries between two worlds. Weeks passed in uneasy harmony. Settlers and members of the tribe traded small gifts, dried venison for beans, woven baskets for flour, and Red Rock Gulch thrummed with cautious optimism. Yet not all hearts embrace this fragile peace. A posse of vigilantes, fearful of Indian reprisals and hungry for land, formed on the town's outskirts. Led by a hot-headed rancher named Cyrus Blackwell, they rode toward the river canyon with rifles loaded and torches ablaze, intent on teaching the savages a lesson. When word reached the tribe's village, the elders convened beneath the council lodge. The chief's eagle-feathered headdress slipped from his head as he spoke. Our warriors have honored the child's gift. Now their people face unwarranted attack. Across the Rimrock Valley, Blackwell's posse gathered at dawn, brandishing weapons and ready to strike. Magnolia learned of the threat when her family passed through Red Rock Gulch. She overheard Cyrus Blackwell rallying men in the dusty street. They'll come for our cattle next. We can't wait for the judge. Let's ride out now. Horror froze her blood. Clutching her bear token, she raced for her mother's side. We have to warn them, Magnolia cried. Emma and John exchanged a glance. Your courage saved us once, Emma said. Now it's time to return the favor. Together, the Anders family galloped back toward the canyon, Magnolia's small frame perched in front of her mother. As Blackwell's posse thundered past, she sprang from the saddle and ran to the nearest warrior sentry, calling in the chief's tongue, Aya, Ion, they come with torches and guns. The warrior hesitated. Settlers and tribes spoke little besides courtesy, and Magnolia's urgent tone pierced the morning air. He spurred his horse and galloped to the council lodge where the chief sounded the war horn, 2 low notes of alarm. Within minutes, painted riders poured from the village, spears raised but held in restraint. The chief rode at their head, calling Magnolia forward. At the canyon's mouth, Cyrus Blackwell's men formed a line, rifles trained on the approaching warriors. Dust swirled between the two forces, tension crackling like live coals. Magnolia stepped between the lines, holding high her bear token and shouting in both tongues, Peace! Peace! Shock rippled through the warriors and settlers alike. The chief laid a gentle hand on her shoulder, and Cyrus Blackwell blinked, lowering his rifle at last. Magnolia's voice rang out over the quieted canyon. Remember the bread and the flood, how we saved each other? We are friends. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she extended her hand toward the tribe and then to the settlers. In that charged moment, Cyrus Blackwell's hardened expression softened. He spat into the dust, then ground out his threat. This ain't over, girl, but you got guts. He turned and led his men away, rifles slung and heads bowed. The chief exhaled, sheathing his spear. Warriors lowered their weapons, their painted faces solemn. Quiet fell like gentle rain across the canyon floor. Magnolia stood at the heart of it all, their shared humanity made plain by a child's unwavering belief in peace. In the weeks that followed Magnolia's brave stand, the canyon valley blossomed with renewal. Settlers and tribe members worked side by side to rebuild the collapsed bridge over Cedar Creek, clearing debris and nailing fresh planks under the watchful eye of the chief and the Anders family. As each nail fell into place, laughter echoed where once only tension reigned. To commemorate their hard-won peace, the chief spoke to the elders and settlers alike of a gathering, a festival of two worlds, where both cultures would share food, song, and stories. Invitations went out on carved wooden tokens and hammered iron discs, calling every family in Red Rock Gulch and every lodge in the valley to rejoice in unity. On the morning of the festival, the riverbank buzzed with activity. Long tables hewn from cottonwood logs were set with woven baskets of roasted bison, smoked trout, and fresh wild berries, alongside settlers' apple pies and hunks of homemade cheese. Smoke from the tribe's cedar fires mingled with the savory aromas of skillet-fried biscuits, bringing settlers and warriors together in eager collaboration. Magnolia wore her finest calico dress and a necklace of turquoise beads given by the chief's daughter, Little Eagle. Together, they led a procession of children, settler and tribal, down the creek's sandy bank. At the water's edge, Emma drummed a steady rhythm on a hollowed gourd, while the chief's pipe carrier offered prayers of thanks. When the drumbeat rose, the settlers joined in, stamping boots in time and raising voices in a song that blended English hymn and tribal chant. All afternoon, stories flowed like the river's current. Grandfather Carson recounted the Anders family's journey from the Mississippi, and the chief's eldest told tales of the tribe's ancestors following buffalo herds across these plains. Jackson Cole demonstrated lariat tricks to wide-eyed boys, while tribal artisans taught settlers how to weave willow baskets. Every laughter, every shared clap of hands, hammered another nail in the structure of their newfound trust. As dusk fell and lanterns glowed golden amid the cottonwoods, Magnolia slipped away with Little Eagle to the river's edge. There they scattered handfuls of flower petals into the water, a gesture of thanks bridging their two worlds. Above them, fireflies rose in a swirl of light. Magnolia pressed her friend's hand and smiled, knowing that from this day forward they would walk the valley's trails not as strangers, but as sisters of the same land. In the flicker of campfires and the echo of distant songs, the festival of two worlds sealed a promise that compassion, once sparked by a single loaf of bread, would continue to light the path ahead for every soul in the canyon valley. As the maples blazed with autumn fire, settlers and tribal families turned their thoughts to winter's trials. Cold winds would scour the canyon floor, and deep snow would bury all but the hardiest provisions. Yet this year, thanks to Magnolia's courage and the festival of two worlds, no family faced the season alone. Under the chief's direction, tribal hunters guided settlers to hidden stands of pine nuts and taught them how to trap snowberry shrubs beneath the drifts. In return, Emma and John showed families how to smoke trout over cedar embers and share canned apples pressed from the Anders orchard. Jackson Cole oversaw the construction of a communal barn, its wide loft storing grain and pelts, its sturdy frame sheltering horses and cattle alike. One crisp morning, Magnolia rode with Little Eagle to oversee the final inspections. Their breath misted in the air as they led a small herd of mixed-blood calves, wild bison cross-stock prized for resilience, into the new corral. Behind them trailed a group of settlers and tribal youths, each child carrying a satchel of feed. The chief watched from the barn's doorway, nodding in approval. "See how they work as one?" the chief asked Jackson, lifting Little Eagle onto his shoulder so she could pat a calf's flank. Jackson smiled, tipping his hat. "I've never seen a stronger team." Winter came earlier than expected. A late-season snowstorm swept through the valley, blanketing trails and stranding families in outlying cabins. Word spread quickly. A settler homestead east of the river needed help. Magnolia and Little Eagle mounted the toughest ponies they could find, a gray Mustang and a painted Pinto, and rode through gale-whipped drifts to deliver blankets, dried venison, and cedar boughs for firewood. At the Anders barn, neighbors gathered around a roaring hearth. Settlers handed out steaming mugs of spiced cider, while tribal elders offered sweet pine needle tea. Children huddled together, their faces flushed with cold and glow of warmth. In that shared heat, fears melted away. The canyon's harshest season had become a season of solidarity. By the time the last snowflake fell, the communal barn stood full, every family's larder stocked, every animal sheltered. Magnolia looked out across the fields, white and unbroken, save for a single trail of tiny hoofprints leading to the corral gate. She followed the path to Little Eagle, who held up the bear token that had started it all. "We did this," Magnolia whispered. "Together." Little Eagle grinned and pointed to the token, now carvings softened by winter's frost. In that moment, both girls understood that true strength lay not in walls of wood or fences of rope, but in the bonds of compassion that weathered every storm. When the last drifts melted and the canyon greened once more, the valley buzzed with fresh purpose. Under Magnolia's guidance, settlers and tribal families joined to plant a communal orchard at the high meadow, rows of apple, pear, and chokecherry saplings that would feed generations to come. Little Eagle led tribal youths in sowing wild berry patches along the creek banks, ensuring both worlds would always have sweet harvests. Near the newly repaired bridge, Jackson Cole and the chief oversaw construction of a small schoolhouse, a single-room log building where children of every background would learn side by side. Emma Anders taught reading and arithmetic, while a tribal elder, Morning Star, introduced lessons in the native language, music, and the ways of the land. Magnolia and Little Eagle sat at the same rough pine desk, their laughter weaving through lessons as easily as the spring breeze rustling the cottonwoods outside. One afternoon, as sunlit dust motes danced in the open doorway, Magnolia raised her hand to answer a question about counting beads. The room fell silent in respectful attention, not because of strict discipline, but because every child knew that learning together was the true frontier adventure. Outside, the chief and Jackson staked out the school's flagpole, hoisting first the settlers' star-spangled banner and then the tribe's emblem of eagle and sun, side by side in shared honor. At day's end, parents gathered beneath the porch roof for a simple celebration, steaming bowls of stew flavored with cedar nuts and prairie herbs, slices of fresh bread, baked with skill learned from Magnolia's family, and cups of sweet pine needle tea. Stories passed from tongue to eager ear. Settlers recalling the first time they tasted wild game, tribal elders speaking of the longest winters they had known. Each tale carried the promise that, together, they could endure whatever the frontier dared to throw at them. As dusk painted the canyon walls in lavender and rose, Magnolia slipped away with Little Eagle to the orchard's edge. They pressed their hands into the soft earth at the base of the young trees and placed a single loaf of bread wrapped in cloth as an offering of gratitude. The token of that first gift lay beside it, the carved bear, now weathered but never forgotten. Hand in hand, they watched fireflies awaken among the blossoms. Magnolia whispered, "This is just the beginning." Little Eagle nodded, her eyes shining with hope. Above them, the twin banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, a symbol that a single act of kindness given from a child's heart, had blossomed into a community's lasting legacy. Years unfurled like the wild grasses on the prairie, and the valley that once teetered on the brink of conflict grew into a place of uncommon harmony. The communal orchard flourished into a grove of heavy-laden trees whose blossoms each spring scented the air sweeter than any frontier flower. The schoolhouse rang with children's laughter and the mingle of two languages, forging friendships as sturdy as oak. Magnolia grew into a young woman of compassionate strength, known throughout the canyon as Breadheart, a name whispered with respect by both settlers and tribal people. At her side, Little Eagle became a gifted healer, blending settler remedies with the tribe's ancient herbal lore. Together, they tended the sick, taught the young, and guided every new generation to remember the power of that first gift. On the day Magnolia married her childhood friend, a kind ranch hand named Samuel Reed, the entire valley gathered beneath the twin banners at the schoolhouse. The chief offered a blessing of eagle feathers, and Jackson Cole presented the bride with a locket holding a tiny slice of Magnolia's original loaf, preserved in crystal resin. As she fastened it to her dress, tears glistened in her eyes, a reminder that compassion outlives hardship. Mileposts and trail markers now bore two symbols, the settler's star and the tribe's sun, side by side along every road leading into Red Rock Gulch. Travelers passing through would find water and welcome at the communal barn and wood-fired bread at the Anders homestead. Anyone, regardless of tongue or skin, was family under that western sky. On quiet evenings, Magnolia would walk to the orchard's edge with a loaf in hand, freshly baked, of course. She would place it at the base of the oldest tree beside the carved bear token and offer a silent prayer of gratitude. In return, the orchard's branches rustled a soft benediction, and fireflies danced like sparks of that first small miracle. And so, beneath endless sunsets and star-swept nights, the story of the little girl who gave her bread lived on, etched not in stone monuments or dusty ledgers, but in the lives she transformed. For in the Wild West, where every soul faces its own frontier, it remains true that sometimes the smallest kindness carries the greatest power to heal old wounds, to forge unbreakable bonds, and to turn strangers into family beneath the vast, enduring sky. Decades later, long after Magnolia's hair silvered at the temples and Little Eagle's healing hands grew revered across distant valleys, their story endured, carried on the wind, and etched into the land itself. The orchard they planted stood as a living testament, gnarled trunks heavy with fruit, each harvest a reminder of shared sacrifice and solidarity. Travelers who paused beneath the twin banners at Red Rock Gulch found more than water or bread. They found a community bound by a simple truth: generosity begets generosity. Folk told of Magnolia's brave gesture, the loaf of bread offered in fear and hope, and how the tribal warriors, moved by her innocence, repaid that gift with their own acts of mercy. School children recited the story alongside their lessons, tracing in their fingers the bear token's carved lines as they learned letters and words in both English and the native tongue. In homes across the valley, families passed down the ritual of placing bread beneath the oldest orchard tree each spring, a silent vow to uphold the spirit of unity. On the centennial of that first encounter, the valley gathered once more beneath the western sky. Elders from every lineage spoke of the journey from distrust to kinship, of winters weathered together and springs renewed by collective care. Then, As dusk settled into star-pinned night, a single loaf was carried to the foot of the ancient tree, its fragrance drifting like a benediction. And there, in the hush that followed, the wind seemed to sigh in harmony, carrying the echo of Magnolia's voice, soft yet steadfast, reminding all who listened that in the vastness of the frontier, the smallest deed can leave the largest imprint on the heart of history.